She collapsed at his doorstep, bruised, barefoot, and barely breathing, fleeing a past no woman should survive. Now she stands beside him as his wife, and it makes you ask what kind of love is strong enough to grow from the ashes of cruelty. The sound cuts through the desert night like a blade-iron chain scraping against wood, horses snorting in the darkness, and somewhere beneath it all, the barely audible whisper of prayers spoken in a language most white men would never understand. Nakoa has been counting the rhythm of the wagon wheels for 3 days now, memorizing every creak and groan of the cursed vehicle that's become her prison. Her wrists are raw from the shackles, her throat parched from the meager water rations, but her spirit, that's something they haven't managed to break. Not yet. The dust storm hits just after midnight, a wall of grit and fury that sends the slave traders scrambling for cover. In the chaos, as visibility drops to nothing and the horses panic, Nakoa sees her chance. The lock on her chains is old, weakened by rust, and her constant working at it with a sharp stone she'd hidden in her boot. One final twist, and the metal gives way. She slips from the wagon like smoke, bare feet hitting the hard-packed earth as wind and sand whip around her like nature's own war cry. Behind her, she can hear shouting, cursing, the sound of men realizing their valuable cargo has vanished into the storm. But Nakoa is already running, her Apache blood singing with the wild freedom of the open desert. For hours she stumbles across the barren landscape, the storm both her salvation and her torment. Sand fills her mouth, her eyes, the torn fabric of her dress. Her feet leave bloody prints on the rocks, but she doesn't stop. Can't stop. Freedom tastes like copper and determination, and she'd rather die in the wilderness than spend another day in chains. Dawn finds her collapsed against a wooden fence, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion and blood loss. Through swollen eyes, she can make out a modest cabin in the distance, smoke curling from its chimney like a promise of warmth. With her last ounce of strength, she crawls toward that symbol of hope, dragging herself up 3 wooden steps before darkness claims her completely. Ellis Boone discovers her there as he steps outside to milk his cow, a coffee cup freezing halfway to his lips at the sight of the unconscious woman crumpled on his porch. She's Apache, that much is clear from her features, and the traditional beadwork still clinging to her torn dress. Blood stains the wood beneath her, and her breathing is so shallow he has to kneel down to make sure she's still alive. He doesn't speak. Ellis isn't much for words on the best of days, but his actions are gentle as he lifts her slight form and carries her inside. He places her on his own bed, covers her with clean blankets, and sets about tending to her wounds with the quiet efficiency of a man who's seen his share of suffering. If you thought these were crazy, you won't want to miss what happens in this next video. Nakoa wakes to the smell of stew and the unfamiliar sensation of clean sheets against her skin. For a moment, panic floods her system as she remembers the slave wagon, the chains, the desperate flight through the storm. Her dark eyes dart around the unfamiliar room, cataloging exits, searching for weapons, preparing to run again if necessary. The door creaks open, and she tenses like a cornered wildcat. But instead of the brutal faces she's learned to fear, she sees a tall, weathered man with kind eyes and graying hair. He moves slowly, deliberately, keeping his hands visible as he sets a bowl of water and a plate of food on the table beside the bed. Ellis doesn't try to speak to her, partly because he suspects she might not understand English, but mostly because he recognizes the look of a hunted animal in her eyes. He's worn that expression himself in the dark months after losing his wife and daughter to fever. So he simply nods once, backs away to give her space, and settles into a chair by the window where he can keep watch without seeming threatening. Nakoa studies him through hooded eyes, trying to read his intentions. In her months of captivity, she's learned that white men's kindness usually comes with a price, often one that made her skin crawl and her stomach turn. But this man seems different. His movements are careful, respectful. He doesn't stare at her body or leer at her vulnerability. Instead, he gazes out the window at his small garden, occasionally glancing her way to make sure she's still breathing. Gradually, the story of her capture unfolds in her mind like a nightmare she can't escape. The raid on her band's winter camp, the screams of her people as they were cut down or scattered to the winds, the iron shackles that marked her transition from free woman to property. She remembers her brother's final words as the slavers dragged her away. "Never beg, sister. They can take our bodies, but not our souls." The stew smells like heaven, but Nakoa doesn't trust it. She's learned to be suspicious of gifts from strangers, especially white strangers. But as the hours pass and the man Ellis, she hears him mutter to his horse outside, makes no demands, asks no questions, and simply tends to his daily chores while leaving her in peace. Something inside her chest begins to loosen. When night falls, Ellis spreads blankets on the floor beside the fireplace, leaving her the comfort of the bed. It's a gesture so unexpected, so contrary to everything she's experienced in recent months, that tears spring to her eyes before she can stop them. For the first time since her capture, Nakoa allows herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, she might survive this ordeal with her spirit intact. As she drifts off to sleep in clean sheets, the sound of Ellis's steady breathing nearby provides an unexpected comfort, the presence of someone who asks nothing from her except the chance to heal. Over the next few days, a careful routine develops between them, built on mutual respect and unspoken understanding that both are carrying wounds that go deeper than physical scars. The sound of approaching hooves sends Nakoa scrambling from the kitchen table where she's been slowly eating breakfast, her bare feet silent on the wooden floors as she disappears through the back door. Ellis doesn't need to tell her to hide. They both understand that visitors rarely bring good news to isolated homesteads, especially when there's a wanted woman under the roof. Sheriff Hobart dismounts with the heavy thud of a man who spent too many years in the saddle and not enough caring about the people he's supposed to protect. His star catches the morning sunlight as he approaches Ellis's porch, spurs jangling with each deliberate step. Everything about the man screams authority and suspicion, from his cold gray eyes to the way his hand rests casually on his gun belt. "Boone," he says by way of greeting, tipping his hat just enough to be technically polite. "Mind if I come up? Got some questions need answering." Ellis nods once, his face revealing nothing. He's never been one for unnecessary conversation, and Sheriff Hobart has always rubbed him the wrong way, too quick to judge, too slow to think, and far too comfortable with other people's suffering. "Been hearing stories," Hobart continues, settling his bulk into Ellis's best chair without invitation. "Couple of traders came through town yesterday, missing some valuable property. Young Apache woman. Escaped during that dust storm 3 nights back. You wouldn't happen to have seen anything unusual, would you?" From her hiding place in the barn, Nakoa watches through gaps in the weathered wood, her heart hammering against her ribs. She can see Ellis's profile, calm and unreadable, giving nothing away. The sheriff produces a folded paper from his vest pocket, a bounty notice with her description, and a reward that makes her stomach turn. $500 for her return, Hobart says, his voice taking on the tone of a man discussing livestock. Seems she's got some fight in her, which makes her worth more to certain buyers. You know how it is with the exotic ones, men pay premium prices for something different. Ellis's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly, the only sign that the sheriff's words affect him. "Haven't seen anyone," he says simply, his voice carrying the flat finality of truth. It's not technically a lie he found her. She didn't come to him seeking help. Hobart studies Ellis for a long moment, clearly hoping to catch some sign of deception. But Ellis has perfected the art of revealing nothing, learned in the hard school of grief and isolation. His face remains as impassive as stone. "Well," the sheriff says finally, heaving himself to his feet, "if you do see anything, you know where to find me. 500's nothing to sneeze at, especially for a man living alone way out here. Could buy yourself some nice improvements, maybe even find yourself a proper wife." Ellis doesn't respond, just watches as Hobart mounts his horse and rides away, dust clouds marking his retreat toward town. Only when the sound of hooves fades completely does Nakoa emerge from her hiding place, moving like a shadow across the yard. "Why?" she asks in careful English, the first word she's spoken to him. "Why did you lie?" Ellis looks at her for a long moment, taking in her defensive posture, the way she's poised to run if his answer disappoints her. "Because," he says quietly, You looked at peace for the first time since I found you. That evening, as firelight dances across the cabin walls and the desert settles into its nightly silence, Nakoa finds herself speaking words she's kept locked away for months. Maybe it's the way Ellis tends the fire without demanding conversation, or how he's placed a second cup of coffee within her reach without making a show of it. Whatever the reason, the story begins to pour out of her like water from a broken dam. My people called me Nakoa, she says, her voice barely above a whisper. It means the warrior. My brother said I earned the name when I was 7, fighting off a mountain lion that threatened our camp. She touches a faint scar along her jawline, a reminder of claws and courage. Ellis listens without interruption, his weathered hands steady on his coffee cup. He doesn't ask questions or offer meaningless comfort. He simply witnesses her truth with the same quiet respect he's shown since finding her on his doorstep. We were camped in the high country when they came, Nakoa continues, her dark eyes reflecting the dancing flames. White men with guns and chains, led by a half-breed tracker who knew our ways. They killed the elders first, the wisdom keepers, the ones who remembered the old songs. Then the warriors who tried to fight back. Her voice catches, and she pauses to steady herself. My brother held them off long enough for some of the children to escape into the rocks. The last thing he said to me was, "Never beg, sister. They can take our bodies, but not our souls." Ellis sets down his coffee and looks directly at her, his blue eyes holding depths of understanding that surprise her. Your brother sounds like a wise man, he says simply, and a brave one. Something in his tone encourages her to continue. They sold me in Santa Fe first to a man who wanted. She shivers, unable to finish the sentence. When I fought back, he sold me to the slavers, said I was too wild for civilized company, but someone would pay good money for an exotic piece. The words hang heavy in the air between them, carrying all the horror and degradation she's endured. But instead of the pity or disgust she expects, Ellis simply nods and speaks with quiet conviction. You're not a piece of anything, he says. You're a person who survived hell and came out fighting. That takes more strength than most people ever find in themselves. It's Nakoa's turn to study him, this strange white man who offers refuge without demanding payment. You've lost people too, she observes. It's not a question she can see grief written in the lines around his eyes, in the careful way he maintains the cabin, as if waiting for someone's return. Ellis is quiet for so long she thinks he won't answer. Then, staring into the fire, he begins to speak. Mary and little Sarah, my wife and daughter. Fever took them both 2 winters ago, same week. Found them in our bed, holding hands like they'd decided to leave together. His voice remains steady, but Nakoa sees his knuckles whiten around the coffee cup, buried them under the cottonwood out back. Been talking to them every morning since, telling them about my day, asking their opinions on everything from crops to weather. The admission hangs between them, like a bridge, 2 broken people finding unexpected understanding in their shared experience of loss. The bounty hunters arrive 3 days later like vultures drawn to carrion, their horses blowing hard from a long ride, and their eyes scanning Ellis's modest homestead with the calculating gaze of men who make their living from other people's misery. There are 4 of them, hardened professionals who've learned to track human prey with the same skill most men reserve for deer or elk. Nakoa spots them first from the kitchen window, her Apache training allowing her to detect the danger long before Ellis notices anything amiss. She moves like liquid shadow, disappearing through the back door and making her way to the barn, where she can observe without being seen. Her heart pounds against her ribs, but she forces herself to remain calm and still. Ellis emerges from the cabin just as the leader, a scarred man with dead eyes and tobacco-stained teeth, dismounts near the front porch. The homesteader's demeanor changes subtly, his shoulders loosening in a way that suggests either complete relaxation or coiled readiness. Those who know Ellis well would recognize the second option. Afternoon, the bounty hunter calls out, his voice carrying false friendliness. Name's Garrett. We're tracking a runaway. Wondered if you might have seen her pass through. Apache girl, pretty little thing. Answers to various names depending on who's calling. Ellis leans against his porch railing, adopting the slightly swaying posture of a man who's been drinking alone. He lets a foolish grin spread across his face and speaks with the careful pronunciation of someone trying not to slur their words. "Haven't seen hide nor hair of any Indians," he says, his voice carrying just the right note of lonely desperation. "Though I sure wouldn't mind the company, if you catch my meaning. Gets awful quiet out here, just a man and his thoughts." Garrett's eyes narrow slightly, clearly trying to determine if Ellis is genuinely drunk or playing some deeper game. But the homesteader maintains his performance perfectly, swaying just enough to seem unstable, rambling about the loneliness of bachelor life in terms that make the bounty hunters exchange knowing look. "Mind if we take a look around?" Garrett asks, his tone making it clear this isn't really a request. "Professional courtesy, you understand. Got to be thorough in our work." "Course not," Ellis replies, gesturing broadly toward his property. "Look all you want, boys. Nothing here but me and my animals. Though I got some good whiskey if you're interested in a drink before you move on." The offer serves its purpose, leading the bounty hunters away from the barn where Nakoa crouches in darkness, every muscle tense with the effort of remaining absolutely still. She watches through gaps in the weathered wood as Ellis guides the men toward the cabin, engaging them in increasingly pointless conversation about weather, crops, and the challenges of solitary living. For an hour, the dangerous game continues. The bounty hunters search the cabin, the outbuildings, even the small garden behind the house. But Ellis's performance is so convincing the lonely drunk eager for any human contact that they begin to let their guard down, accepting his hospitality and relaxing into the assumption that they're dealing with a harmless fool. Only when the last rider disappears over the ridge does Ellis allow his mask to drop. He returns to the barn walking normally, his face grim with the knowledge of how close they've come to disaster. In the days that follow, Nakoa begins to weave herself into the quiet rhythms of Ellis's life like thread through fabric, subtle, essential, and surprisingly natural. She doesn't ask permission or announce her intentions. She simply begins contributing to the daily tasks that keep the homestead running. Ellis discovers her Apache heritage brings unexpected advantages to his small operation. She can read weather patterns in cloud formations he's never noticed, predict animal behavior with uncanny accuracy, and identify edible plants that could sustain them through lean times. When she repairs a broken fence using techniques that require no nails or purchased materials, he finds himself genuinely impressed. "Your people knew things mine forgot," he observes one morning, watching her coax his stubborn vegetable garden into more productive arrangements using companion planting methods passed down through generations. Nakoa looks up from the tomato plants she's been staking, dirt smudged on her cheek, and genuine contentment in her eyes. "Different knowledge for different lives," she replies. "Your people learn to build things that last. Mine learn to move with the land instead of fighting it." The comment sparks something approaching actual conversation between them, not the careful exchanges of their first week, but the natural back and forth of two people discovering they enjoy each other's company. Ellis finds himself sharing observations about his crops, his animals, the small triumphs and failures that make up homestead life. It's during one of these conversations that Ellis attempts what might generously be called a joke, some self-deprecating comment about his cooking skills that comes out more clumsy than humorous. But Nakoa laughs anyway, a sound so unexpected and genuine that it stops Ellis mid-sentence, his weathered face breaking into the first real smile she's seen from him. The moment passes quickly, both of them suddenly aware of how natural their companionship has become. But something fundamental has shifted between them. They're no longer just a man offering shelter and a woman accepting it. They're two people who've discovered they fit together in ways neither expected. Meanwhile, the town of Cedar Falls buzzes with speculation about Ellis Boone's increasingly frequent trips for supplies, his improved appearance, and the mysterious changes in his demeanor that sharp-eyed residents have begun to notice. "Man's been alone too long," observes Mrs. Henderson at the general store. "Probably talking to his dead wife's ghost, or worse." Isolation does strange things to people's minds. But Ellis doesn't care about town gossip. For the first time since losing Mary and Sarah, he finds himself looking forward to each new day rather than simply enduring it. There's purpose in his morning chores now, satisfaction in preparing meals for two, and comfort in the knowledge that someone shares his small piece of the world. One evening, as they sit on the porch watching the sun set over the desert, Nakoa breaks their comfortable silence with a question that's been building in her mind. "You keep saying I'm free to leave whenever I want," she says quietly. "But what if I don't want to leave? What if I've already found where I belong?" Ellis looks at her profile in the fading light, understanding that her words carry implications far beyond simple gratitude for shelter. Tom Garrett returns alone on a Tuesday morning, when the desert heat shimmers like liquid glass. He's a professional hunter of human beings, and the $500 bounty on Nakoa's head has kept him awake nights, gnawing at his pride like an infected wound. This time he approaches differently, leaving his horse beyond the ridge and moving on foot with predatory stealth. He's watched the homestead for hours, noting how the woman moves freely around the property, the comfortable familiarity between her and Ellis that speaks of more than charity. Nakoa is working in the garden when Garrett makes his move, her attention focused on tomato plants that have become her particular pride. The morning sun feels good on her shoulders, and for a moment she allows herself to forget about bounty hunters and slave wagons. The first she knows of danger is a rough hand seizing her arm, spinning her around to face Garrett's scarred visage and tobacco-stained grin. Well, he drawls, his grip tightening when she tries to pull away. "Seems the drunk wasn't as stupid as he looked. Been hiding my prize right under my nose, haven't you, darling?" Nakoa doesn't scream. Apache women are trained from childhood not to reveal weakness to enemies. Instead, she drives her elbow toward Garrett's ribs with precise force, using techniques her brother taught her. But the bounty hunter is ready for resistance, catching her arm and twisting it behind her back with professional efficiency. "Now don't make this harder than it needs to be," Garrett says, producing rope from his belt. "You come quiet, and I won't have to mess up that pretty face before I deliver you to your new owner. Fight me, and I'll make sure you arrive damaged goods." That's when Ellis appears at the garden gate, moving with deceptive calm. He doesn't shout warnings or make dramatic threats. He simply raises his rifle and puts a bullet through Garrett's chest before the bounty hunter fully realizes he's there. The shot echoes across the desert like thunder, sending birds exploding from their roosts. Garrett staggers backward, looking down at the spreading red stain on his shirt with confused disbelief that his luck has finally run out. "Should have stayed away," Ellis says quietly, his voice carrying no satisfaction, no anger, just the flat finality of a man who's done what needed doing. Garrett collapses into the tomato plants, his blood watering the soil as his life flows away. Sheriff Hobart arrives within the hour, drawn by reports of gunfire from nervous neighbors. He finds Ellis calmly dragging Garrett's body away from the garden while Nakoa salvages what plants she can from the disturbed soil. "What happened here, Boone?" Hobart asks, though his tone suggests he's already formed conclusions. The bounty notice in Garrett's pocket tells most of the story, and the sheriff's not stupid enough to miss the implications. "Man tried to take something that wasn't his," Ellis replies, leaning on his shovel with the tired air of someone who's grown weary of explaining obvious things to slow people. "Didn't give me much choice in how I responded." Hobart studies the scene, the dead bounty hunter, the protective way Ellis positions himself near Nakoa, the obvious bond between them. Whatever he's thinking, he keeps it to himself. "Self-defense," the sheriff says finally. "Man attacks your property. You got every right to protect what's yours. No charges will be filed." The words carry weight beyond their legal meaning, and all three people present understand the significance. Sheriff Hobart's departure leaves Ellis and Nakoa standing in the aftermath of violence, both understanding that Garrett's death has solved nothing, if anything. It's made their situation more dangerous. Dead bounty hunters have friends, partners, people who will come asking uncomfortable questions about missing colleagues and unclaimed rewards. This won't stay quiet, Nakoa says, echoing concerns that have been building in both their minds since the gunshot faded. Men like him travel in packs. When he doesn't return, others will come looking. Ellis wipes sweat from his forehead, leaving a streak of dirt across his weathered skin. "Then we better make sure they find us someplace they can't touch us," he replies, a plan already forming in his practical mind. The next morning brings a ride to Cedar Falls that changes everything. Ellis saddles both horses, a declaration of partnership that doesn't go unnoticed by either of them, and they set out for town like two people with legitimate business instead of a homesteader and his hidden refugee. At the Territorial Land Office, Ellis conducts business with the methodical efficiency that served him well throughout his life. He files papers declaring Nakoa as his legal wife, backdating the ceremony to just after her arrival and paying the clerk extra to ensure the documents are processed immediately and filed in triplicate. "Mrs. Boone," the clerk says, handing Nakoa the papers that legally transform her from hunted fugitive to protected citizen. "Congratulations on your marriage. Will you be needing certified copies for any other jurisdictions?" The word wife hangs in the air between them as they leave the land office, carrying implications neither has fully considered until this moment. They're not playing roles anymore. The legal documents make their partnership as real as ink and paper can manage. Was that the right thing to do? Ellis asks as they pause outside the general store, suddenly uncertain about the decision he's made in the name of protecting her. Putting you in that position without asking first? Nakoa looks down at the marriage certificate, her name written in careful script beside his, and realizes that something inside her chest has been waiting for this moment without her conscious knowledge. The paper represents more than legal protection. It's recognition of the bond that's grown between them, acknowledgement of the partnership they've built through shared work and mutual understanding. "You didn't lie," she says quietly, her fingers tracing the official seal that marks her transformation from property to person. "When you told that clerk I was your wife, you didn't lie." They're interrupted by the approach of two riders, rough men with the hard eyes and casual brutality that marks them as colleagues of the late Tom Garrett. They rein in their horses near the general store, scanning the street with the systematic attention of predators evaluating hunting grounds. Ellis feels Nakoa tense beside him, her body automatically preparing for flight or fight. But instead of retreating, he steps closer to her, his hand finding hers in a gesture that's both protective and possessive. "Ma'am," one of the riders calls out, tipping his hat toward Nakoa with exaggerated courtesy. "Wouldn't happen to know anything about a missing friend of ours, would you? Man named Garrett tracks runaway property for a living?" The question hangs in the desert air like a challenge, but Ellis answers before Nakoa can speak. "Mister, you're talking to my wife," he says, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who's prepared to back up his words with action. "And she doesn't have anything to say to men who make their living hunting human beings." The confrontation ends when Sheriff Hobart appears and makes it clear that Mrs. Nakoa Boone is under territorial protection. They come with the sunrise, 3 wagons full of armed men who've decided that legal documents matter less than the bounty Nakoa represents. The attack begins with fire torches thrown onto Ellis's barn, flames racing through dry hay while the attackers position themselves for a siege. Ellis and Nakoa wake to smoke and horses surrounding their cabin. This isn't some opportunistic raid. These are professionals who've planned their approach, cutting off escape routes and controlling the battlefield. "They mean to burn us out," Nakoa observes, peering through shuttered windows at the flames consuming Ellis's barn. "Make us choose between fire and bullets." But Ellis has advantages they don't know about: knowledge of his property, defensive positions prepared during lonely evenings, and neighbors who recognize the sound of trouble. The first shots ring out as the sun clears the hills, bullets splintering wood and shattering glass. Ellis returns fire from behind overturned furniture, his rifle speaking with deadly accuracy. Nakoa surprises him by producing a traditional Apache bow she's kept hidden, along with arrows crafted during quiet evenings. Her first shot takes down a man circling behind the cabin, the arrow finding its mark with lethal precision. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Ellis asks, reloading. "Apache women defend their families," she replies, loosing another shaft that sends an attacker diving for cover. "Your people aren't the only ones who know how to fight." The battle rages for what feels like hours, a desperate exchange of gunfire that leaves the cabin pocked with bullet holes and the air thick with powder smoke. Ellis fights with methodical competence, while Nakoa moves like a shadow, appearing at different windows to loose arrows before vanishing again. The tide turns when old Pete Morrison arrives with 3 neighbors, their rifles adding fresh firepower to the defense. The sight of reinforcements breaks the attackers' will. They'd come expecting to overwhelm an isolated homesteader, not fight a pitched battle against determined defenders. As the last wagon retreats toward the horizon, trailing wounded men and disappointed curses, Ellis and Nakoa emerge from their bullet-scarred cabin to survey the damage. The barn is gone, reduced to smoking timbers, but they're alive and together and free. Sheriff Hobart arrives an hour later with a full posse, drawn by reports of sustained gunfire and the column of smoke visible for miles. He finds Ellis and Nakoa standing in the ruins, holding hands and watching the morning wind scatter the ashes. "Looks like you folks had some excitement," the sheriff observes, his tone neutral as he surveys the battlefield. Spent shells and arrow shafts tell the story clearly enough, along with blood trails leading away from the property. "Men came to steal my wife," Ellis says simply, his arm tightening around Nakoa's shoulders. "We disagreed with their intentions." Hobart nods slowly, understanding the implications and apparently satisfied. "Well," he says finally, "ain't no law against protecting your family. Appears to me like you folks defended yourselves against armed trespassers who got exactly what they deserved." The declaration carries weight beyond simple legal recognition. It's official acknowledgement that Nakoa has transcended her status as escaped property and achieved something far more valuable: acceptance as a legitimate member of the community, protected by both her husband's determination and territorial law. 6 months later, Nakoa tends a small garden behind the rebuilt cabin, her belly gently rounded with the promise of new life. The morning sun feels warm on her shoulders as she works among the tomato plants that have become symbols of their shared resilience, growing strong despite the violence that once threatened to destroy them. Ellis emerges from the barn carrying fresh milk, pausing to watch his wife with the quiet contentment of a man who's rediscovered purpose after years of merely surviving. The burns and bullet holes have been repaired, but some scars remain visible, reminders of the price they paid for freedom and the lengths they went to protect what they'd built together. The community of Cedar Falls has accepted them now, their initial suspicions replaced by genuine respect for the couple who faced down professional killers and emerged victorious. Mrs. Henderson stops by weekly with supplies and gossip. Old Pete Morrison helps with the heavier farm work, and even Sheriff Hobart tips his hat respectfully when they visit town. "You think they'll come again?" Nakoa asks, as they settle onto the porch to watch the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. It's a question she's asked before, always with the same mixture of curiosity and calm acceptance that marks her approach to potential danger. Ellis considers the question seriously, as he does all her inquiries. In the distance, a dust cloud marks the approach of a lone rider, another bounty hunter perhaps, or simply a traveler seeking directions. Time will tell which, but Ellis finds he's no longer concerned about such distinctions. "Let 'em," he says quietly, his hand finding hers as they watch the approaching figure. "We've got everything we need right here, each other, good neighbors, and the knowledge that we can face whatever comes next." The rider draws closer, and they can see it's just a merchant heading to town, probably carrying news from the outside world that once seemed so important. But Ellis and Nakoa remain on their porch, content to watch the sunset and feel their unborn child move between them, living proof that love can flourish even in the harshest circumstances. Nakoa rests her head against Ellis's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of hay and honest work that has become synonymous with home. "No more chains," she whispers, echoing words she spoke on their unofficial wedding day. "Only roots." As if summoned by her words, another dust cloud appears on the horizon, this one larger, more ominous. Ellis tenses slightly, his hand moving instinctively toward the rifle that's never far from reach. But Nakoa remains calm, her free hand resting on the curve of her belly. "Whatever comes," she says, with the quiet confidence of a woman who's survived slavery, violence, and the long journey from captivity to freedom, we'll face it together. The dust cloud resolves into another merchant wagon, this one heading away from town rather than toward it. Ellis relaxes, but keeps his eyes on the horizon where new challenges might appear. In this harsh land, vigilance is the price of peace, and peace is the foundation upon which they're building their future. As the last light fades from the western sky, Ellis and Nakoa rise from their porch and walk inside their cabin, two people who found each other in the midst of darkness and created something beautiful from the ashes of their separate sorrows. If you thought these were crazy, you won't want to miss what happens in this next video.